This is actually making me so mad, dude. So look, if you guys have been keeping up with the news coming from Russia at least a little bit, you might probably know that Russia doesn't really have free speech at the moment. Right after the start of the war in Ukraine, Russia has introduced new laws about discrediting the armed forces of Russia, which basically make it so that if you criticize the Russian army or the war in Ukraine in any way, you risk potentially going to prison from anywhere from like 5 to 12 years. And as I'm speaking right now in Russia, there's dozens of people that are imprisoned because of their criticism of the war in Ukraine. And recently it's gotten so bad that even teenage girls are getting arrested for singing anti-war and unpatriotic songs in public. And I think we can all pretty much agree, right, that Russia does have a lot of limits on free speech. All of us except for Z Russians and Vladimir Putin supporters, right? Well guys, not quite, because now it seems like even certain European politicians deny the fact that Russia has censorship and limits on freedom of speech. And in particular, I'm talking about the ex-president of Estonia, who recently, in the context of discussing the EU's ban on multi-entry visas for Russians, had this to say. He's also nicely proven his own points. Russians were never this angry about Bucha, but the minute you say they cannot go to Lisbon or Nice, it is a Holocaust. Then a Russian person responded saying, 2 people I personally know got 8+ years sentence for a social media post about Bucha. Go f yourself with this sort of hate speech. To which the ex-president of Estonia responds, aside from your foul language, I doubt anyone got 8 years for social media posts about Bucha. But we're used to lies. I guess your obscenities are over the end of only multiple entry visas, so you can keep going back and forth without applying for a new one, you dissident you. And guys, this right here, I think this right here is pretty much an example of the horseshoe theory, but when it comes to either hating or supporting Russia. Because usually when you talk to a Z Russian who supports the war in Ukraine, who supports Vladimir Putin, they usually say that all Russians actually support Vladimir Putin and are fully behind everything he's doing, and also, Russia has no censorship and no issues with freedom of speech, and even if anybody's getting arrested, it doesn't happen, but you know, even if it does, they probably deserved it. And apparently it's the same when you talk to somebody who actually hates Russia too. Because they say the exact same thing, that all Russians are zombies, they all support Vladimir Putin, and there's actually no censorship in Russia, no limits on freedom of speech, and nobody's actually getting jailed for 8+ years for posting things that go against the government and criticize the war. And as a Russian myself who left Russia out of the fear of persecution and the possible censorship, I find all of this extremely ironic and very infuriating. So hey there people, it is your boy Roman, your favorite neighborhood Russian, and in this video, we're gonna take a look at the insane hypocrisy of some EU bureaucrats, and also I'd like to talk about how a lot of these super anti-Russian European politicians often actually have suspicious links and even business connections to Russia. Allegedly. And it almost feels like they're trying to be as anti-Russian as possible and hate on every Russian in existence, including anti-war Russians, simply to whitewash the fact that they themselves had quite a lot of dirty business in Russia. Allegedly. So, who is Tomas Hendrik Ilves? He's an Estonian politician who served as the president of Estonia from 2006 until 2016, who's pretty much been crashing out on Twitter ever since the war with Ukraine started, and he's basically one of those people that hates anti-war Russians more than actual Russians who support Vladimir Putin. For example, he had this absolute banger and classic in 2023 when a Russian tourist, a 23-year-old, was eaten by a shark while vacating in Egypt, and the ex-president of Estonia said media neglects getting the shark's position on this, so he's basically making fun of the death of a random person just because he happens to be Russian. This is behavior I maybe would excuse if it came from like a 25-year-old Ukrainian, but this guy is 71 years old, okay? I'm sorry, but I just don't think that a 70-year-old grown man who also was in politics for decades should say shit like this. Call me crazy, guys, but I just don't think this is very normal. So you can kind of guess about the character of this guy, right? But recently he completely embarrassed himself by once again saying that nobody in Russia, not a single person, has actually been sentenced to 8+ years, and it's actually lies. Which is absolute horseshit, by the way, because in Russia, dozens of people have been currently sentenced to over 8 years in prison specifically for criticizing the war in Ukraine and speaking out about Bucha. Now, personally, as a Russian citizen, I like to avoid this conversation because, well,
I prefer really not to speak. If I speak, I am in big trouble, and I don't want to be in big trouble.
Essentially, yes, because speaking about it is pretty much a guarantee that you'll get a criminal case on you in Russia. And the thing is that even if you live outside of Russia, speaking out about this stuff can still be dangerous and it can still ruin your life. About a year ago, for example, I made a video about this situation that happened in Canada, where a Russian immigrant lady who's been living in Canada for several years was sentenced to 8 years in prison in Russia in absentia, and when she tried to apply for her Canadian citizenship, she ran into issues issues because Canada was looking at her as if she's a criminal because she has a criminal case in Russia. Her story actually had a happy ending because in the end the Canadian government recognized that the crime she committed is simply having free speech and criticizing the Russian army, but things don't always go so great. And some people actually get deported and jailed in Russia even if they live in a foreign country for criticizing the Russian government while being outside of Russia. But according to the ex-presidents of Estonia, that is all horseshit. Now, what's actually quite funny is that in the replies in the community notes as well, people started immediately providing actual examples of Russians who have been indeed sentenced to 8+ years in prison for this exact crime. Basically, immediately proving him wrong. And even some Russian opposition leaders who now live outside of Russia, who have been convicted in Russia specifically for this exact reason, have spoken out. For example, here we have Ilya Yashin, who said, "Oh really, you doubt? Nice." Just for your context, by the way, Ilya Yashin was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison for speaking out about Bucha on a live stream while he still lived in Russia. And he actually went to Russian prison and spent like a year in it, and afterwards he actually got freed as a part of a big prisoner exchange between Russia and the West. You have Maxim Katz right here, another Russian opposition personality who now lives in Israel, who also got 8 years for social media posts about Bucha, and he even provided actual receipts from his criminal case about why he got convicted. The Russian human rights organization Over the Info also chimed in, providing a link to their website where they actually document all the people that have been persecuted in Russia for their anti-war views. Yes, the point is, Russian people are actually being sent to prison for 8+ years for doing this, and yet, the ex-president of Estonia, who spends his entire day hating on anti-war Russians on Twitter, thinks it's actually bullshit. And us anti-war Russians are apparently making this shit up just to seem like victims. I love it. I absolutely love it, guys. These are our politicians, guys. Incredible. This world is great. And actually what's quite funny is that some people started responding with this right here, for example, a photo of Thomas, the ex-president of Estonia, hanging out and being friends with Medvedev, the president of Russia, because back in the day, it was business as usual, and European politicians are definitely not responsible for appeasing the Russian government and Vladimir Putin. It's people like me who were little children when this shit was going on. We are the ones that are responsible for everything that is going on. And the thing is, I believe the reason why this guy is being so anti-Russian right now is because he's basically trying to get some points in the future in case he gets called out for actually being like an asset to the Putin regime. Allegedly. Because the ex-president of Estonia, Ilves, has actually already been accused in the past of some weird connections to Russia. Allegedly. So around 2017-2018, there was a big controversy that rose up about laundering of Russian money through an Estonian bank. I'll just read it. It became known that around 800 billion of suspicious transactions had flowed from Estonian, Russian, Latvian, and other sources through the Estonia-based bank branch of Denmark-based Danske Bank from 2007 to 2015. It has been described as possibly the largest money laundering scandal ever in Europe. Branches of this Danish bank in Tallinn, for example, were knowingly dealing with funds from the family of Russian President Vladimir Putin and his cousin Igor Putin, and also the Russian security service FSB. So long story short, at the exact same time when Thomas Hendrik Ilves was the president of Estonia, the Russian governments and Vladimir Putin himself pretty much were laundering insane amounts of money through Estonian banks. And yet, nothing was done about this, you guys. And also, Ilves has actually commented about this. Speaking in an interview in a Danish paper, former president said that Estonia as an Eastern European country is a convenient bad guy, so to speak. He believes that the money laundering issue is rooted more so in Denmark than in Estonia. And actually, what's even funnier is that on Twitter, once again, some anti-war Russians have actually called out the presidents of Estonia for this. I'm supposed to answer a troll? The usual arrogance of I have direct questions for you. Who the hell are you? But then again, why not? This is like the first president lolcow, guys. It's actually incredible. First, it's hard to understand, I know, but we are a parliamentary state. The president has no executive authority. And second, this only became known after my term, when Estonia investigated a Danish bank that skirted Estonian law and was not subject to BOE supervision. Your whataboutism is magnificent. Tens of thousands of civilians are raped/killed, children kidnapped, but what about some Liksutova? It's incredible, guys. Like, he's calling the guy out for whataboutism. And yet in this situation, when we're talking about money laundering and corruption involving Russia and Estonia, the guy's response is, oh, but what about the Ukrainians killed in the war? Like, what? You are doing the whataboutism, dude. And I also love the fact that when there's insane money laundering going on in the country of Estonia, the person who was literally the president of the country has no responsibility in what is happening. And yet, myself as a regular Russian, I bear all the responsibility for everything that Vladimir Putin has ever done. Make it make sense, please. And the thing is, like I said, it feels like this is not the only European politician that is currently trying to earn some points by being as anti-Russian as possible to actually hide their connections to Russia, allegedly, because the exact same can be said, for example, about Kaja Kallas, who was recently the Prime Minister of Estonia and who is currently the Vice President of the European Commission. Now, Kaja Kallas is famous for this classic banger of a tweet here: "Stop issuing tourist visas to Russians. Visiting Europe is a privilege, not a human right. Time to end tourism from Russia now." And she's recently repeated the exact same thing, in the context of the EU banning multi-entry visas for Russians, saying, "Starting a war and expecting to move freely in Europe is hard to justify." I don't think I started the war, lady, okay? I really don't think I did. The EU is tightening visa rules for Russian nationals amid continued drone disruptions and sabotage on European soil. Traveling to the EU is a privilege, not a given. And the thing is, look, I'm not even making this video because I'm super mad about the multi-entry visa ban, although in my opinion, once again, it also kinda hurts only the Russians that actually oppose the government. No, the point is that Kaja Kallas is also, she also has some interesting history and business with Russia. Allegedly. How about this article from 2 years ago? This was after the start of the war with Ukraine, by the way. Witch hunt. Estonian Prime Minister defends husband's Russian business links. Every single time, guys. Every single time. Kaja Kallas' partner owns shares in a company that continued to do business in Russia after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The Estonian Prime Minister has described the controversy surrounding her husband's alleged Russian business links as a witch hunt by political opponents calling for her resignation. Kaja Kallas has been under pressure since reports emerged last month that her husband part-owned a logistics company that continued to do business in Russia after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Speaking to the Guardian this week, Kallas dismissed the scandal as political opportunism by her rivals. "This is a witch hunt by the opposition. It is an excuse to waste time in parliament and obstruct our progressive agenda," she said.
Делается все так, по принципу такого компота. Значит, вот берут там всякую разную муть, чушь всякую собирают. Про моих знакомых людей, про людей, про которых я вообще никогда не слышал. Потом, значит, создают вот такой продукт. И все бы ничего, если бы за этим не стояла вполне определенная история и добиться своих политических целей.
That was a video of Russian President Medvedev replying to a question about Alexei Navalny's investigation into his corruption. Try to find any differences. Kallas, who has led a stridently pro-Ukraine government since coming to power, has defended herself by saying that her husband, Arvo Halik, is not a public figure and that she cannot be held responsible for his business activities. Wow, really? Once again, a story that is old as time. A person whose literal family, the closest person to her, her husband, was making money in Russia is telling everybody that Russians should not be allowed into Europe because they're all responsible for the war, of course. Reports emerged last week that Stark Logistics, a company partly owned by Kaja Kallas' husband, Arvo Halik, has continued to do business in Russia since the invasion of Ukraine last year. Kallas and Halik maintained that the business was assisting another Estonian company, Metaprint, to wrap up trade in Russia. Local media have reported that Metaprint sold 17 million euro worth of goods to Russia between the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 and the following November. So yes, guys, it is exactly how it looks. Allegedly, we have yet another European politician that has benefited from trade with Russia, that has appeased Russia and the Russian government and Vladimir Putin, who was part of this whole European clique of Putin friends, right? Allegedly. Right now, she's being as anti-Russian as possible so that people forget the fact that she had business in Russia, allegedly, after the start of the war in Ukraine, you guys, by the way, okay? And I love the logic, by the way. I do love the logic behind all of this because myself as a Russian, right, I get called out for not leaving the country early enough. Like, I get comments all the time from people saying, oh, he only left after the war started, after sanctions were introduced, right? This guy's like a piece of shit who only thinks about himself. He doesn't actually oppose the war in Ukraine in any way. He just left because he wanted to continue to earn money, which is like, duh, that's what everybody would fucking do, you dumb fucks. But also the fact that I left after the war started doesn't mean that I supported Russia before that every single day of my life, right? And people usually say that, you know, if I was really woke and I really opposed what Russia is doing, then I should have left Russia in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia. When I was 10 years old, by the way, guys. I was literally 10 years old, okay, when that happened. And then also some people say, well, you never left after 2014, after Crimea got annexed, right? You didn't have a problem with that. Meanwhile, guys, I was 16 years old. when Crimea got annexed, right? And I spent, the next years of my life, like, graduating high school, graduating university, thinking about what I want to do with my life. Like, you do not just leave your country that fucking easily, you dumb fucks. Especially when the West is trying to restrict you in every possible way, right? So yes, it is my fault as a Russian for not leaving the country when I was 10 or 16 years old, a literal fucking child. But it is completely okay for a European politician, a prime minister of a country in the European Union, to be doing business in Russia after the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Allegedly. Yes, that is completely normal and okay. I don't see any discrepancies in the logic here, you guys. You guys are doing fucking great. I mean, it's just such a joke, guys. Like, it's such a joke. But this is the reality that people like me, anti-war Russians, have to live in. With these fucking grifters who have never seen hardship for a day in their fucking lives and have earned millions through dealing with Russia and with the Russian government. Allegedly. They are basically fucking saints, okay? But I am responsible for everything that Russia has ever done. I'm basically Vladimir Putin. And also, there's a lot more interesting stuff with Kaja Kallas, to be completely honest. Like, I really love the fact, for example, that she always talks about how Estonia was occupied by the Soviet Union and it was so terrible for the Estonian people and so on, right? And yet, at the same time, her father was literally a member of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Come on, bro. Like, how is this... It just writes itself, but yes. Her father was a member of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, he worked in the finance ministry of the Estonian SSR, and he was the director of the Estonian branch of State Labor Savings Bank System of the USSR. So long story short, like, Kaja Kallas is basically a Nepo baby, whose entire, like, political career and the entire standing of her family in Estonia to begin with, stems from the fact that her father, right, if she sees the period of Estonia under the USSR as an occupation, her father was basically a collaborator, who collaborated with the Soviet governments, right? And now her family is upper class, they're in the political elite specifically because her father was in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And once again, guys, at the same time, it is totally my fault, once again, me, who was 10 years old when Russia invaded Georgia, who was 16 years old when the annexation of Crimea happened. It is my fault that the Ukraine war started and that Russia turned into what it is today. Fucking amazing. I love it, guys. But yeah, guys, I guess that is gonna be pretty much it for today's video. I just wanted to show you guys the blatant hypocrisy of Europe's most vocal anti-Russian politicians, who once again say that Russians have no right to travel to Europe, and that Russians are all responsible and they should all be locked in their country, right? I do find it quite funny that a lot of the time these exact takes come from people who literally had business dealings with Russia. Allegedly. Incredible, guys. Absolutely incredible. It sounds like a fucking joke, it's basically cartoonishly hypocritical, but that is just the reality of modern Europe. Oh, and by the way, the only reason why I'm making this video is because I believe that, we have freedom of speech here in Europe, unlike Soviet Russia, right? So, if I get in trouble for making this video, I guess that's proof that Europe is just like Soviet Russia, I guess. So I really hope Europeans stay true to your principles of freedom of speech and the ability of everybody to voice their opinions, right? I don't know, guys, it's just an absolute fucking joke. But yeah, people, thank you so much for watching this video, thank you for making it all the way to the end. If you guys enjoyed this video, as always, please make sure to slap the like button on it, and also if you guys want to support me additionally, that is financially, then go over to the link down in the description and buy me a coffee or become a YouTube channel member. It helps me out quite a lot, and yeah, guys, thank you for watching the video, let me know what you thought down in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.